hello, everybody. You would think after how many weeks have I done this to remember to turn off the banner? Dang it. I hate when that happens. Yep. How's everybody doing tonight? Thursday night, 6 p.m. It must be Ask Your Favorite RCDD time. So first thing we always kind of like to start off with is, what are you drinking tonight? What are you drinking tonight? Chuck is drinking ginger ale. Evidently, Chuck's almost out of ginger ale. In the chat box, tell us what you are drinking. It is after hours. It's after 6 o'clock on the Eastern Seaboard, so it is acceptable to go ahead and drink anything you want. But Chuck is drinking ginger ale. And it's been an exciting week. Had a couple classes this week. Had lots of good questions. Got a good subject for next week's podcast. One thing I do want to point out. So the Big C Fall Conference is coming up August 22nd through the 26th. I think that's the dates. Start thinking about it. I saw an email or a LinkedIn post. It's going to be a hybrid. So combination virtual and also in real time. That's going to be cool. They put out a call for presenters to do presentations, either live or virtually. The only thing is it actually is closing. The submissions is closing tomorrow, April 9th at 11:59 p.m. So if you want to be a presenter, you better jump on it. You better hurry up. So this week I actually got lots of good questions. I'm going to try to get through all of them. Again, in the chat box, also let us know what are your questions, so that way we can get to them tonight. If not, I will capture them and we will save them. So the first question I have is comes from Pennsylvania. Let me put on my safety glasses. So this question came from Pennsylvania, came via an email, and says, Chuck, we are installing a DAS system and we're installing radiating cable. What is that? Well, some people may not know what a DAS is. That's a distributed antenna system. So there are some places where cellular and WLAN and PCS signals just cannot reach, period. So what you're going to find is they'll put a distributed antenna system inside of a building or inside of a tunnel. For example, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, so a lot of times I'll drive across the Pennsylvania Turnpike and I'll go through those tunnels. And when you get in the middle of that tunnel, there is no cell service, but you can still use your cell phone. You can still download stuff. So why is that? That's because of distributed antenna systems. So what is a radiating cable? It's basically a cable that usually coax, and it acts like an antenna. It transmits information and receives information, and it's inside of the building. So that way, if you're deep in the throes of some really big, super huge office building, you can still get your service and stuff. Now you're probably thinking, why don't they just use antennas? Well, they can. They can use regular antennas, what they call discrete antennas. But if you use a radiating cable, usually coax, like I said, you're going to find that it's usually save a little bit in cost. So that's what it is. So you're basically installing an antenna in that building. It's kind of cool. I wish I knew more about the project. You didn't give me a lot of information there to go off of. So and one good thing about the coax cabling, it's good. Its bandwidth is 70 megahertz to 2 gigahertz. I think that's what it is. Yeah, 70 megahertz to 2 gigahertz. So it's got a pretty wide range that it can operate at. So the next question comes from Ohio. This is sent to me via LinkedIn Messenger. So George is drinking water today. Again, what are you drinking? Chuck is drinking ginger ale. And I'm going to apologize now in case you hear my puppy. I have a 5-month-old German Shepherd. She's a bit anxious tonight, so you might hear her in the background. So this question says, Chuck, I listened to your show on the podcast about bits and bytes and the sinusoidal waves. What's a start bit? Well, that's pretty easy, actually. So when two devices want to communicate to each other, it takes all them ones and zeros and it puts it into a packet. Now, if it's an asynchronous transmission, which means it's not working on a timed relationship, it puts a start bit on it and a stop bit. And then start bit or stop bit is just a character. And then it transmits that whole entire packet with the start and stop bit down the cable. When the receiver gets it, it sees the start bit, it starts listening. And then when it sees the stop bit, it stops listening. And then it strips them off and then sends that the rest of that signal going back up. Again, that's called an asynchronous transmission. A synchronous transmission means that the transmitter and the receiver are working on a clock. They've agreed on mutual time, and they are communicating against each other without that start and stop bit. The advantage there is you're not putting a start and stop bit on every packet of information, so it makes it a little bit more efficient. Okay, the third question. This one comes from California, and this one was actually sent to me via text, so this person obviously knew me. It says, Chuck, we're doing some Mac work at a doctor's office. The cable that they used for voice cabling only had 4 conductors, and they weren't colored like regular cable. They were colored green, red, black, yellow. Can I reuse this cable? So for those who don't know what MAC means, M-A-C, it's an acronym. By the way, I do an acronym challenge every morning on LinkedIn about 8:10ish or so. I've got it set up so it automatically posts at 8:10 every morning. So MAC is an acronym, stands for Moves, Adds, and Changes. Moves, Adds, and Changes. So basically what that means is the original install is done, the customers moved in, and they realize, oh, we need a drop over there for Mary Jo. Oh, we need a drop over here for that printer where you're going in after the customers moved in. That's called MAC work. Moves, Adds, and Changes. So what you came across there and is actually what's called quad cabling. Quad cabling. I think they also used to call it Jacob cabling, if I remember right. So what is that? That's actually a POTS cable, plain old telephone service cable. It's not even twisted. It has lower performance than Cat3 cable. Cat3 goes up to 16 megahertz. So it's not even as good as Cat3 cable. Now, you're asking if you can reuse it. You're not asking what you're reusing it for. If you're reusing it for a analog phone line, like a fax machine or a modem or something like that, that'll work fine. But realistically, you want to use a Cat5e cable at minimum. Matter of fact, you really want to use Cat6. You read the TDM, it says you should install 5e, but they do recommend Cat6. And the reason they do that is because that way it works for both voice and data, and it also will work for like VoIP systems and stuff like that. So George asked this question. Let me put this on there. Boom. Synchronize would be like a time-best authenticator. Am I correct? I'm not sure what you mean by authenticator, George. You'll have to kind of be elaborate on that, but it does work on a time-based relationship. So, you definitely can. It doesn't use a start-stop bit. So, there you go. So the next question is, this one comes from Connecticut, and this came via a message on LinkedIn. If you're not a friend with me on LinkedIn already, send me a friend request. That way you catch all these posts when I do them and stuff. So what the question from Connecticut is, I'm new to the industry, and I want to know what is the difference between a TR and an ER. Well, if you're new to this industry, you have probably already learned that our industry loves acronyms. The only thing our industry loves more than acronyms is it loves changing acronyms. So what is a TR? A TR is a telecommunications room. An ER is an equipment room. Now, your question was, what is the difference between that, right? Now, the difference is, an equipment room is a building serving facility. So it's going to serve the entire building or just the portion of the building that client or that tenant rents or leases or owns. So if it's a 10-story building and they only occupy the first 5 floors, then that equipment room only serves 5 floors. If the customer owns the entire building and they have people in all 10 stories, then it serves all 10 stories. In that equipment room, you're going to find the entrance facility. That's where the outside plant cable comes in. That's where you can find your DMARC. That's where you can find your PBX. That's where you're going to find your main network gear. It's usually like a computer room. You might hear it called MDF or main equipment room, or you might hear it called computer room. Equipment room. That's the new terminology for it. So what is a telecom room? A telecom room is floor serving or portion of floor serving. What I mean by that is it only serves 1 floor. So again, if you're doing tenant on like I talked about that other one, right? They occupy floors 1 through 5. So another tenant is on this 6th floor. It's a different company. So their telecom room only serves the 6th floor, right? And it serves them. Or if there's multiple tenants on the same floor, it's only going to serve a portion of the floor. That's the difference between equipment room and telecom room. I hope that explains that for you. Okay. So then the next question number 5, it says, help me settle a bet. Uh-oh. Always, by the way, this comes from Arizona, by the way. Help me settle a bet for how far apart can I place J-hooks? Okay, now if you actually go read the TDMM, it says the maximum distance between J-hooks is 5 feet. It also says that you're allowed to have up to 12 inches of droop between those 2 J-hooks. What I mean by droop is if you got 2 J-hooks that are 5 feet apart, because of gravity, the cable is going to droop. So you don't want more than 12 inches. If you have more than 12 inches, then there's too much cable there, and all that weight is going to actually stretch the cables, right? Now, if you have less than 12 inches, like let's say you have none, well, then let me turn this light down a little bit. It's way too bright in here. Then you're stretching the cables, right? Now that's going to cause other problems with it as well. So you want to have between 12 inches of droop, and you want them to be no more than 5 feet apart. Now, the best practice for this is to put them in at random distances. So, for example, you might want to put the 4 feet between the first J-hook and the second J-hook. Maybe 4.5 feet from the second J-hook and the third J-hook. All right, then maybe 5 feet between the third and fourth. You want to randomize them, because what that does, it helps eliminate harmonic disruption. If you put the J-hooks exact distances, and whatever number you pick, let's use the 5 feet that's in the TDMM. If you put them exactly every 5 feet apart, what you're going to do is you're going to cause a dead spot at a certain frequency if you overfill those J-hooks, because that's the way the sinusoidal wave works, right? It should, a certain frequency shows up the exact footage increments. And now you got every 5 feet, the cables on the bottom are being crushed, and that's going to cause a dead spot at that frequency. Right. All righty. So now let's so the J-hooks. Some other things about J-hooks. Initially, don't fill them more than 50. That helps you keep them from the ones on the bottom getting crushed, and that might help avoid that harmonic disruption. Harmonic disruption. I always wondered about that when I was a technician. So this question number 6, comes from Illinois, and this question is, how many sheets of plywood should be mounted in the telecom room? Well, it's not how many sheets of plywood, it's how many walls, right? And actually, I just saw this. There's a group on Facebook called Cable Dog University, and you can join that group if you were a cable dog in the military. And the guy who runs that is a close friend of mine, and he actually just posted this on there as a question: how many walls need to be covered with plywood? And the correct answer is 2. The correct answer is indeed 2. Now, when you're putting that plywood on the wall, a couple things. Number one, it's got to be AC grade plywood. Now, what does AC grade mean? A means there's no blemishes. C grade means there's some blemishes and an occasional knot. So when you're mounting that plywood, obviously you're going to want to mount the C side towards the wall. The C side towards the wall. You also want to make sure that you use 3/4 inch AC grade plywood. You can use thicker, but you know they say 3/4 inch. You also want to make sure when you mount it to the wall that you start it at 8 inches above finished floor. 8 inches above, I almost said 8 feet. 8 inches above finished floor. Now, a piece of plywood's 4 by 8. That's going to be cutting it really close. There's going to be some closets where you're not going to be able to come up 8 inches above finished floor. In those scenarios, you want them between 4 and 6 inches above finished floor. Now, when you're mounting down that low, you got to watch out, because quite often you're going to find there's electrical receptacles. So you have to cut out a hole to accommodate for those electrical receptacles. So you make sure that you plan it. And when you're cutting holes in plywood, or you're cutting plywood, measure twice, cut once. I'm building a chicken tractor right now, and I messed up on it. I got to go back and fix it. So, and then now when you're putting a plywood on the wall, the TDM says that all surfaces of that plywood should be painted with fire retardant paint. So that's the front, the back, and all the sides. If you cut a hole in that plywood, like I just talked about, then the insides of that also have to be painted. Now, you do have to be careful, because if you're in an area, like, for example, where the authority having jurisdiction requires fire retardant paint, and you're using fire retardant plywood, you want to make sure that you don't paint over the stamp. Also, when you choose the paint, choose a light color, a color that's going to be reflective. Because remember, light bounces off things. So you want to make sure that you maintain that minimum lighting in that telecom room so you can see things. Because when you start terminating some cables, some of the dyes that they use in dim light can make it really difficult to tell the difference between, for example, the orange and the brown pair. So especially depending on what kind of dielectric they use, and that can really cause you problems if it's dimly lit. The reason they want you to mount it above 8 inches is because it limits the damage from water ingress. So if water happens to get into the telecom room, that plywood's not all the way down near the floor, so it doesn't soak it up. Now, you probably think, well, Chuck, I've never seen water in a telecom room. I have. I saw it in a military base in Louisiana, actually. And it got flooded in there. All the plywood had to be pulled off the wall and to be replaced. It was just not fun. So when you're mounting that plywood to the wall, you want to make sure that you use galvanized screws. And you want to make sure that the screws are 1/2 inch longer than the combination of the plywood and the combination of the drywall. So if it's 3/4 inch plywood, 1 inch gypsum board, that's 1 3/4 inches. So 1 3/4 inches plus 1/2 inch is 1 1/4. Yeah, no, 2 1/4 inches. So sorry. And you want to try to line the plywood up so that when you put those galvanized screws in, they go into studs. If you can't line it up with studs, then an alternate method would be to use toggle bolts and fender washers. Just make sure that when you use toggle bolts and fender washers, that you keep them at least 2 inches away from the edges, and you want to go all the way around them as you're putting them in. That's going to help gather, because it does say that you want to make that plywood that you're installing, you want to make sure that that plywood is going to be able to handle anything that you're going to be mounting to it. Now, a long time ago, when I used to work for a small little interconnect company in Springfield, Virginia, it's called TCI. My friend Tom Cornbrooks is now running that thing. Him and I were friends many, many, many years ago. I was running the cable crew. So we would go in, we'd pull the cable, we'd terminate everything, and then the phone guys would come in and mount the KSUs and stuff on the wall, or the voicemail systems, or whatever other devices. I usually didn't know what was going to be mounted on that wall. So I always used toggle bolts and fender washers. And I'll tell you something else that I always used. I always used liquid nails. So I put liquid nails on the back of the plywood. I'd mount that to the wall. That thing was never coming off the wall. Never coming off the wall. Literally, the wall would fall down before the plywood would fall off. And if it was 110s, everything turned on 110 blocks, I would take my skill saw and I would cut a square through the wood and through the wall. And I'd bring my cables down behind the wall and then come out. And then I would terminate, so that way I didn't have to address the cables. Made the job go a lot faster and stuff. But with bend radiuses now, that might be a consideration that you're going to have to take in fact. So make sure that you have enough bend radius so you don't affect the performance of the cable. Oh, going back to that paint, I forgot to mention, you have to do 2 coats. 2 coats of fire retardant paint. Now, fire retardant paint, you can buy it either the fire retardant paint, or you can buy the chemical to add to your regular paint. Either one works just fine and dandy. Like I said, just make sure that you don't paint over the stamp. And I would also save the package that the chemical came in, or the empty canister that the paint came in. So that way, if your inspector comes out and says, "Did you use fire retardant paint?" you can show them the actual empty package that it came out of. So yeah, that's a definite must there. So actually, it says that I'm not getting comments from some of my destinations. So if you're on LinkedIn and you're sending me comments, I don't see them. It looks like it's broadcasting on LinkedIn, but it doesn't look like the comments are coming across on LinkedIn. But if you answer me a question in LinkedIn and I don't see it before the end of this broadcast, I will capture those and answer them on next Thursday nights after hours live with your favorite RCDD. So, by the way, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and go to the YouTube channel and subscribe to that. Last time I checked, we were at 139 subscribers. We just hit the 3,000 views threshold. So this question comes from Alaska. Ooh, I love Alaska. I did went out there to teach a couple of times. I taught in Anchorage and Fairbanks, and I did it in June because I'm a Florida boy and I know better to go to Alaska in the middle of the winter time. Right. So what is Alaska asking us? It says, let me see here. Chuck, we have a job for a multi-story building and we are installing copper and fiber backbone. Should we pull the cable from the top floor down or from the bottom floor up? Okay, so the correct answer to that question is it can be either. It can be either. It kind of just really depends on what it is that you are set up for, right? So if my preference was always to pull from the top floor down. Use gravity to help you, right? Now, if you're pulling from the top floor down, you do have to be careful, especially if you're working with a skeleton crew. A skeleton crew is not a bunch of skinny guys. It just means you don't have as many people as you're supposed to have. So when you're pulling from the top down, what you want to use what's called a cable brake. Cable brake. Now, a cable brake's not an apprentice. Okay, a cable brake is a specific device that you're going to put the cable through, and you can apply tension to it, and it slows the spool down. So that way, because what happens is, did this one time at a project in Arlington, Virginia. It was the Office of Naval Research. So we were pulling some backbone cable, some 100 pair cable from the top of the building all the way down to the first floor. And it was just me and one other guy. So what we did is, I was a young technician at the time. I didn't know a whole heck of a lot. So we put the cable in through the hole going down to the 9th floor. Well, my partner went down to the 9th floor, grabbed it, put it through the 8th. I went to the 8th. And then he went to the 7th, and I went to the 6th, and I went to the 5th. And then we got down to the 4th, and all of a sudden there was 1,000 feet of 100 pair cable laying on the floor because gravity took over and literally just started pulling the cable right off the spool. And it was not a cable brake on it. It just kept going and going and going and going. And then luckily we didn't damage any equipment or knock any blocks off the wall. Thank God. So use a cable brake if you're going top down. Again, that was always my preference, but you can also go from the bottom up. The bottom up. Now, if you're going from the bottom up, there's some things you're going to need to do. You're going to need a tugger, right? And you're going to need a bull wheel. Now, a bull wheel, what that does is it's a big pulley that does a couple of things. One, it gives you mechanical advantage, so it helps. If you're pulling if you set the tugger up at with 60 pounds of pressure, it will actually pull 120 because it doubles it. Well, it depends on how many bull wheels you have. There's a great YouTube video on all that. So it's a mechanical advantage. So it allows you to pull harder than you can physically. Use them all on the farm all the time. It also keeps you from exceeding the bend radius. So if you're pulling from the top, from the bottom up, what you're going to want to do a lot of times in buildings inside the structural concrete, they have attachments. So you can attach a bull wheel so that way you can pull the cable up and you get that mechanical advantage. Just make sure that you use pull rope that has adequate strength for the weight of the cable. Now, just to kind of give you an example, 900 pair cable. It weighs 1.5 pounds per foot. 1.5 pounds per foot. So a 10-story building, right? It's 12 feet per floor, right? So that's what, 120 feet. So 120 feet times 1.5 pounds. That's a good bit of weight, right? So make sure you're using pull rope, something that's going to be able to handle all that extra weight, right? And so let me see. Okay, last question. We're at 27 minutes in, so this is the last question, unless somebody types a question in on the YouTube channel. And again, if you type the message on LinkedIn, I will capture that and I will answer on the next one. And this one, actually, this is the second time I've gotten this question, and I got this question in a class, and I didn't give the guy the answer because I told him I'd research it, and then the question popped up again. I don't know if it was the same guy. I don't know if he discovered my podcast and he asked me again or not, but yeah, I got the question again. And the reason I think it might be the same guy is because they specifically call out a certain Firestop company. And basically the question says, Chuck, I'm installing cables with an existing customer. There is a wall with a 4-inch sleeve going through it with an STI Firestop plug. STI Firestop plug. So they're calling out for a specific manufacturer there. And the person in the class did the same thing too. He goes, he wants to, can I put a hole in the center of that plug to run my cables through? You can run the cables through it, but you can't drill a hole through it. If you actually I actually reached out to STI and I got a hold of, did you know STI has a podcast? It's called Feel the Burn or something like that. Look them up. They're just starting off. They're just launching. I've already subscribed to them. As a matter of fact, the guy that I reached out to for the question is the host of that show. And I'm working on the Firestop 2-hour class. I got a little behind because my kidney stones and stuff like that, but it will be published. And they actually sent some material for that. So did Unique and so did Hilti. So it's kind of a combination, a little bit of everything there. So I went and looked at STI's website. I went and looked at their installation sheet. So absolutely you can. You can take, what you want to do is you don't want to cut a hole through it. You want to cut a slit. And that way you can put it around your cable or around your cable bundles, right? Now, the reason you don't want to, and this is STI told me this, the reason they don't want you removing anything from it is because the materials, the intumescent part of the material you're taking out, it doesn't have as much intumescent property. So you can't cut a hole in the middle. You can slice it and then wrap it around it. And also you want to make sure that when you place those cable bundles, that you place them in the center of that pipe, the center of the pipe. That way there's enough material that goes all the way around the pipe that gives that stuff, the Firestop room to expand and stuff. So, so I just got a message coming in on YouTube. Let me see here. And again, I apologize if you're saying something to me on LinkedIn, but I'll fix that. It says, hey, Chuck, literally just discovered your channel. I'm looking into getting RCD certified. What is the best way to get study materials? Wow, that's a good question, man. That's a great question. Well, first you got to go buy the TDMM, the Telecom Distribution Methods Manual. We're currently in the 14th edition. There's 2,200 pages. Now, if there's 300 words to each page, which is about how many words you can get on a page when you're doing single spacing, that's 600,000 words. So there's lots of things that you can do here. So the first thing is join a study group. Okay. Now, actually, I'm running a study group, but we're about 6 weeks. We're 7 weeks into it. So it's too late for somebody new to join in, but I will be doing another free study group once I finish this one, which will be in about 5 months. So if you're ready to start doing that, contact me in about 5 months and I'll give you the information to get in that second free study group. Now, everybody learns a little bit differently. So first you want to get that book. And you didn't mention how much experience that you had, Caleb. So if you've got a lot of experience like I did when I studied my RCD exam, it caused me problems because I was like, that's not the way it's supposed to be done. It's supposed to be done this way. Well, I was taught wrong. The TDM was correct. Now, if you're new to the industry, you should be okay with it because it's all brand new material to you. But it's also going to be harder for you because it's all new materials. In fact, one of the people in my study group is a young lady, Aisha, and she is new to the industry. If I remember, I think she told me she only had 2 years experience or maybe 3 years of experience. So she's reading all this stuff for the same time. So he's got 9 years of experience and he's based in Scotland. Very cool. So when I come to Scotland, I want to visit you, buddy. Scotland's on my list of countries that I want to visit. I've been outside the US and I've just loved the travel. So that's the beautiful thing about that study group that I'm doing. It's on the internet. So boom, the only thing with you is it might be a little later at night because of the time difference. But so 9 years experience. So you should be okay. So when you're reading through some of the stuff, trust me, I've got 40 years of experience and I took my test on the 8th edition of the TDMM and I'm reading the 14th edition, not because I got to pass my RCDD test again, but because I realized it's been a couple of editions. And I want to make sure that I'm current. So as I'm reading through it, some of the stuff I remember reading, other stuff I don't remember reading, and other stuff is obviously brand new. And so the one thing is they love acronyms. So if you don't have your TDMM right now, I suggest that you go online and get the Big C ICT Terminology Handbook 2.0. Just do a Google search on it, or you can look me up on LinkedIn and I will send you the location where you can find that. That way, study your acronyms because everything in that book is indeed acronyms, and it causes lots of stuff. So that was the last question for the day, including the one I got the answer there for the RCD. I'm actually a couple minutes over. I will give you another second or two to see if anybody else has any other questions. So the Monday pop. So Caleb, you said you discovered the channel. I also have a podcast. So the podcast and the after hours are two different things. I don't do the after hours on the podcast, but I do post them on the YouTube channel. The podcast you can download on Apple, Stitcher, Google, all the other fun things. And you can actually listen to them while you're terminating cable stuff. You can download that, and that content's sometimes a little different. So I do two shows a week. One is the audio podcast, one is the after hours. So you have two opportunities, and they're both recorded and put on my website. So if you go to letstalkcabling.com, you will find all of the past audio shows. When you click on the tab to the after hours, you'll find the links to all the after hours as well too. So that way you can go back and catch up with all the stuff that we did. Okay. So we are at our 30-minute mark, and I appreciate everybody coming here this week and stopping in. We had quite a few visitors on LinkedIn and stuff. So I appreciate you guys and gals showing up. And again, if you have any questions, send them to me on LinkedIn, send them to me in an email, send them at questions@letstalkcabling.com, and I will capture them, document them, and answer them. And if I don't have an expertise in that area, I will bring somebody on the show to answer that. All right. Take care, everybody, and I'll see y'all next week.